Hi, Bruce and Nick. Thank you so much for joining me for today's symposium conversation regarding your collaboration for the Stay-at-Home Symposium. I'm so excited to share what you've created together with our audiences. It's truly unlike anything we've seen before, which is a great thing and very exciting. And one of the facets about your collaboration that's different from anything else is that typically we have a visual artist submit a finished work. They pass it off to the composer creates something new, and then we premiere the new composition with the performer. Whereas here, there was a lot of interplay between the two of you. Bruce, I know that you did some work to the piece in response to Nick's original improvisation and composition. So I'm just really excited to hear all about this kind of very dynamic collaboration, which we hope to see more of in the future. So I guess it would be great to start with Bruce and like just your motivations for submitting this painting in particular in the very beginning.
Well, thanks, Audrey. It's great to be here with you and Nick. Finally, have a real conversation together, and someday face to face. We hope, right? Um, as far as this painting is concerned, it's part of an ongoing series of works that I'm doing that are, simply put, a response to my time during the pandemic isolation of daily walks, often 4 to 5 miles in the woods, and many trails here in New England, encountering lichens growing on rocks, you know, thawing streams now, lots of inland swamps with really interesting growths around them, and beavers swimming around, and encountering deer and whatnot. This particular piece I started before I met you and Nick, but a lot of my works, like if you look at my studio right now, I'm working on it probably at any given time, often anywhere from a half a dozen to a dozen pieces that are not finished. None of these things you're seeing here are what I would consider something I'd just release to be exhibited. And so that piece was one of them. And then when Nick saw it, and then he also responded, I believe, in his improvisation initially, I heard he sent me some samples, and I immediately loved your work, Nick. One, because it reminds me of some of my favorite jazz artists, strangely. I mean, even though you're a classically trained musician, reminded me of Coltrane and Miles Davis and many others who pushed their instruments to the limits and actually invoked the natural world by doing that. Jackson Pollock, everyone's heard of Jackson Pollock, the drip painter. He was once asked by his friend Hans Hofmann, also an equally famous artist. Hans asked Jack Pollock, "So Jack, why aren't you painting nature anymore?" And Pollock responded immediately, "I am nature." Erasing the dividing line between culture and nature, which is something I'm really fascinated by. And Nick, in your work, I hear, you may think this is strange, I hear the sounds of animals. I hear the sounds of water against rocks and sand. So that made me want to go back and work on the piece some more. And then it came to me, this was like a nexus point, a gathering point of lots of different energies, including animals maybe around a watering hole. So I renamed the piece from just plain Nexus to Nexus Watering Hole. And I don't know how that hits you, but that's what I got out of it.
So wonderful to hear because this is one of the kinds of dynamic interplays that we are seeking in pairing visual artists with composers, improvisers, instrumentalists. So I'm just so thrilled to hear about this. And I guess, Nick, what was the process like for you when you first saw this painting, and then in that first sort of push of creating something musical out of it? Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, so yeah, it's been really wonderful to work with Bruce over the course of this collaboration because I really love Bruce's work. I think my introduction to Bruce's work was not really with this one painting, but more just looking at his website and surveying many paintings and kind of just getting a feel for what Bruce's world is. And I felt like it was a very inviting world. I think that that's one of the things that I'm uh, attracted to and other artists to work with is their work inviting? Because I definitely try to go for something similar in my own. And yeah, it's interesting, Bruce, that you bring up this idea of going on a walk every day during the pandemic. I've developed the same habit, and I often find that I'm thinking of non-musical, or I guess conventionally non-musical sounds when I'm outside walking, and these are a lot of things that make it into my work. So I think you hit the nail right on the head with that interpretation. But yeah, it's nice to be working with an artist like Bruce, who we have this sort of uh, this world that we're both invested in, that I think it's really nice to have the visuals juxtaposed with the music. So it's really been it's been great to work with him.
Wonderful. And I would love to hear more about your collaboration with Charles Stacy and how that came into play in bringing this performance to life.
Yeah, absolutely. So Charles Stacy is one of my best friends, and one of my closest collaborators. He's a composer and a sound artist and sound engineer, um, currently studying at NYU. And we met at the Boston University Tanglewood Institute back in 2014 when we were both in high school, studying composition. But recently we've really become interested in more improvisatory mediums, recording cello improvs or found object improvs, and then putting some samples on that or putting other sounds against that to really create a world. As I was saying before, I'm interested in this idea of world making, which I think is something that I find in Bruce's work as well. But Charles and I really we work largely by ear, just listening to things that either of us have improvised, and then just saying, okay, I think that this would be the right thing to do here based on our intuition. And the interesting thing is it's the intuition of composers, of people with classical backgrounds. But the music itself is something that is non-classical, I would say, in style. So yeah, it's really great to work with Charles. He definitely, his skill set as somebody who works a lot with electronics and electroacoustic media, it complements mine nicely, because I don't really have that much of a background in computers and robot music.
It's interesting, Nick. I love listening to you talk about your collaboration with Charles, and also about some of the things you're discovering in improvisatory music. I think about Wagner's desire for this Gesamtkunstwerk, this world making, or an entire world of art, which, theater, art, music, etc., dance. But I think he was over-programmed. Not to take anything away from the greatness of Wagner's contribution, but the thing that he was missing, I think, and maybe I got this wrong, but is what we needed from other cultures. For example, the African American slave culture that basically changed the face of American music, and opened it up to forces at play in the musical structures that are more closely connected with the natural world. The way a branch grows on a tree is not according to strict geometry. It's a kind of broken geometry, and therefore a lot more interesting. And so when Jackson Pollock says, "I am nature," he's essentially saying that his arm, reached out with a brush or a stick and dripping paint. His arm is an extension of the same forces that are at play in that branch growing off of that tree in sort of zigzag fashion. And I find in your music a lot of that kind of, I don't know, I don't want to use the word channeling exactly, but deep affinity and resonance with sound in nature. Really, really fascinating.
Well, thanks, Bruce. I really appreciate that. I definitely, yeah, it resonates with me because I love spending time outside. And there's a particular trail here at Oberlin. So I'm just past the North Athletic Fields. It's like this community trail. It has some solar panels in it for clean electricity. But I always find myself going there. And recently, there's just been like the sounds of these frogs there, and that's something that I feel like in my own improvisations, that's sort of been happening a little bit, where these kind of granular sounds that I'm trying to make, and I'm kind of trying to channel the frogs. So you're definitely correct about that idea of nature, and also about this idea of bringing in other cultures. I think I've been influenced by so many different kinds of music that are not classical music, in addition to classical music, with the kind that I really grew up on. And I would say that I I think that other styles of music, especially jazz and free jazz of the kind that you were describing, Bruce, artists such as John Coltrane, Ornette Coleman, Eric Dolphy, these kinds of people I see as really pushing their instruments. And I really want to do something like that on cello. I really want to be a cellist who pushes the instrument. So it's definitely what I'm going for.
That's cool. Cool.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I think I mean, just from the sounds of this collaboration, it's clear that you're already doing that. You're already making these incredible sound worlds that um, really resonate with, and I think there are so many parallels with your work or Nick's work and Bruce's work in that way. This idea of world making in through the sound and through the visual mediums. And so it's just so wonderful to have been able to pair you together and find you resonating on this level without having met in person. It's really special. And I'm just so thrilled to be able to feature you in collaboration this week. And yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to add that hasn't been spoken yet?
I would just add, I'd love to be in the same physical space with you two at some point. For me, my making comes out of a physical encounter, not a theoretical or conceptual or cerebral uh, consideration of theory or anything like that. Even though I read a lot and I think a lot, but for me, where art begins for me is where all that books and words and definitions and quantification of things, where it comes to the edge of a precipice and you can't go any further. And then that's where music begins. That's where art begins. It's where even poetry, which of course uses language, but it breaks language to try to get at that something that we can't talk about. But I'd love to see you two. And I think just being together would be great.
Yeah, same here. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Same here. So we'll make it happen. But
Definitely.
thank you both so much for your time, and I'm so looking forward to sharing this.
Sounds great.